Ambassador Zexthera had witnessed many species take their first steps into the galactic community. The Velnari with their crystalline bodies that sang in harmony. The gas-dwelling Florians who communicated through color changes in their translucent forms. The machine-like constructors who built perfect geometric cities on barren worlds. Each species brought something unique to the vast tapestry of galactic civilization. But none had prepared him for humanity. Standing in the observation deck of the Galactic Council's primary station orbiting Nexus Prime, Zexthera watched the human fleet approach. 300 ships of various sizes, their hulls a dull gray that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. No elegant curves like Velnari vessels. No flowing organic shapes like the Florian bioships. Just angular, brutal efficiency. "They're ugly," muttered Council Member Thrak, his 4 arms crossed in obvious disdain. The board hack representative had made his feelings about humanity clear from the moment their application for council membership had been submitted. "Aesthetics are subjective," Zexthera replied diplomatically, though privately he agreed. Human ships looked more like weapons than vessels of exploration and diplomacy. "It's not just their ships," added Councillor Yithmir, her serpentine form coiled around her hover platform. "Their entire culture revolves around conflict. They've been fighting each other for their entire recorded history." Zexthera couldn't argue with that assessment either. The human historical records were filled with an endless succession of wars, conflicts, and struggles. Most species went through a violent phase early in their development, but typically evolved beyond it before achieving interstellar travel. Humanity seemed to have simply carried their violent tendencies with them to the stars. "The question," said Councillor Drakmesh, his insectoid features clicking together thoughtfully, "is whether they can control these tendencies enough to be productive members of our community." The massive viewing screen flickered to life, showing the bridge of the lead human vessel. A woman with short dark hair and intense blue eyes appeared, wearing what humans called a military uniform. Even in a diplomatic meeting, they chose to be represented by a soldier. "This is Admiral Sarah Chun of the Terran Federation vessel Indomitable," the woman said, her voice carrying clearly through the translation matrix. "Requesting permission to dock for the scheduled council review." "Permission granted, Admiral Chun," Zexthera responded. "Please proceed to docking Bay 7. We'll look forward to your presentation." The human's expression didn't change, but something flickered in those blue eyes. Anticipation? Determination? Zexthera had studied human facial expressions extensively in preparation for this meeting, but they remained frustratingly difficult to read. 2 hours later, Admiral Chin stood before the full Galactic Council. The chamber was a marvel of engineering, a vast spherical space where representatives from 47 different species observed from platforms that accommodated their various environmental needs. Gravity fields, atmospheric controls, and lighting systems all adjusted to create comfortable conditions for beings who had evolved under wildly different circumstances. Chin stood at the center, seemingly unaffected by the alien gazes focused on her. She wore no breathing apparatus despite the chamber's mixed atmosphere, and showed no signs of intimidation despite being surrounded by beings who could crush her ship with a thought. "Members of the Galactic Council," she began, "I come before you representing the human species and our request for membership in your community." Councillor Thrak leaned forward on his platform. "Admiral Chun, our records show that your species has been engaged in continuous warfare throughout your recorded history. What assurance can you give us that humanity will not bring this violence to the peaceful galactic community?" Chin's response came without hesitation. "Councillor Thrak, you're absolutely correct. Humans have fought each other for thousands of years. We've fought over resources, territory, ideology, and sometimes for reasons that seem trivial in hindsight." Murmurs rippled through the chamber. Most species would have tried to downplay their violent history or claim to have evolved beyond it. However, Chun continued, "Those conflicts taught us something valuable. They taught us that there are things worth fighting for. Peace isn't just the absence of conflict. It's something that must be actively protected and preserved." "Pretty words," said Councillor Yithmir, "but your actions speak differently. Your fleet movements in the outer rim sectors suggest aggressive expansion." "We expand because we must," Chin replied. "Not for conquest, but for survival and growth. Every human colony represents families seeking new opportunities, scientists pushing the boundaries of knowledge, and explorers driven by curiosity about what lies beyond the next star. Zextharos studied the human carefully. There was something in her tone, a conviction that went beyond mere diplomacy. Admiral, what would humanity bring to the Galactic Council? What unique contribution would your species make? For the first time, Chun smiled. It was a small expression, but it transformed her entire face. Protection, Ambassador. The galaxy is vast and beautiful, but it's not always safe. There are things in the dark between stars that would threaten everything we've built together, such as pressed Counselor Drakmesh. Chin's expression grew serious. 3 days ago, our deep space monitoring stations detected something at the edge of the Andromeda approach vector. Something that shouldn't be there. She gestured, and a holographic display materialized above the chamber floor. It showed star charts, with a section highlighted in red. A fleet, Chin continued. Not from any known galactic species. Massive ships, at least twice the size of anything in our combined fleets. They've already consumed 12 star systems, stripping them of all resources and leaving nothing but empty space behind. The chamber fell silent. Zextharos felt his breathing sacs constrict with sudden fear. The implications were staggering. You're certain of this? He asked. Our long-range scouts have confirmed it. They call themselves the Devourers, and they're heading directly toward the galactic core. At their current rate of movement, they'll reach inhabited systems within 18 months. Panic erupted throughout the chamber. Counselors began speaking rapidly in their native languages, translation matrices struggling to keep up with the overlapping conversations. Why didn't you report this immediately? Demanded Thrak, his 4 arms gesticulating wildly. We tried, Chin replied calmly. But our diplomatic channels weren't established yet. This seemed like the most efficient way to inform the Council and offer our assistance simultaneously. Assistance? Yithmir's serpentine form had gone rigid. What could your small fleet possibly do against a force that destroys entire star systems? Chin's smile returned, but this time it held an edge that made Zextharos' skin crawl. Counselor, you spent so much time focusing on humanity's capacity for violence that you've missed the real question. Why do we fight so much? She paused, letting the question hang in the air. We fight because we're good at it. We fight because we've learned how to win against impossible odds. We fight because when everything looks hopeless, when any rational being would surrender or flee, humans dig in deeper and find a way to turn the tide. The holographic display shifted, showing human military formations and tactical analyses. Every human conflict, every war we've fought, has taught us something new about combat, strategy, and survival. We've learned to fight in vacuum and atmosphere, in zero gravity, and crushing pressure against enemies using conventional weapons and exotic technologies. We've mastered logistics, developed rapid deployment capabilities, and perfected the art of asymmetric warfare. Counselor Drakmesh's insectoid features were clicking rapidly, a sign of extreme agitation. You're suggesting that humanity's violent nature is actually an asset? I'm suggesting that evolution shapes species according to the challenges they face, Chin replied. The Velnari developed their crystalline structure because their homeworld's silicon-based ecosystem favored mineral integration. The Florians became gaseous because their planet's dense atmosphere made solid forms impractical. Humans developed our capacity for violence because Earth is a death world where everything tries to kill everything else. She gestured to herself. Do you know what the gravity on this station feels like to me? Light. Comfortable. I could probably jump 3 times my height without effort. The atmospheric pressure feels thin, and the temperature is actually a bit cool for my preferences. Zextharos realized with growing alarm what she was implying. He quickly accessed the station's environmental controls. The gravity was set to 0.8 standard galactic units, comfortable for most species. The atmosphere was a carefully balanced mixture that could support the widest variety of life forms. The temperature was maintained at the median preference across all member species. For humans, this was apparently a mild environment. Earth, Chun continued, has weather systems that can level cities, tectonic activity that rearranges continents, predators that hunt in coordinated packs, disease, organisms that adapt faster than we could develop countermeasures. We evolved in constant conflict, not just with each other, but with our entire environment. The chamber had gone completely silent now. Every representative was staring at the human with a mixture of fascination and growing horror. When the Devourers arrive, Chun said, They're going to expect to face civilized, rational beings who will calculate the odds, realize resistance is futile, and either surrender or flee. They've probably encountered dozens of species exactly like that. She looked around the chamber, making eye contact with as many counselors as possible. They've never encountered a species that looks at impossible odds and says, "Hold my beer." Zexthara had to use his translation matrix to understand the reference, and when he did, he felt a chill run through his body. "Admiral Chun," he said carefully, "are you suggesting that humanity wants to fight this threat?" "I'm suggesting that humanity is the only species in the galaxy that can fight this threat," she replied. "But we can't do it alone. We need the industrial capacity of the constructor worlds. We need Velnari harmonic technology for our communication systems. We need Florian bioadaptation for our life support systems. We need the knowledge and resources of every member species." Counselor Thrak had been silent for several minutes, but now he leaned forward. "What exactly are you proposing?" Chin's expression became utterly serious. "A war council, immediate mobilization of all available resources, evacuation plans for civilian populations in the outer sectors, and complete coordination between human military forces and whatever defensive capabilities the Council can muster." "This is madness," whispered Yithmir. "No one fights the Devourers. The scattered intelligence reports we've received all say the same thing. They're unstoppable." "Maybe," Chen acknowledged, "but the alternative is watching them consume everything we've built, everyone we care about, and every world we call home. If we're going to die, wouldn't you rather die fighting?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Zexthara looked around the chamber and saw his own thoughts reflected in the faces of his colleagues. They were scholars, diplomats, builders, and explorers. They had created a galactic civilization based on cooperation, trade, and peaceful coexistence. None of them were warriors, but the humans were. "Admiral Chun," Zexthara said slowly, "if the Council were to grant humanity emergency membership status and approve this war council, what would be your first recommendation?" Chen didn't hesitate. "Evacuate everything within 50 light years of the Devourer advance. Pull back all civilian populations and non-essential infrastructure. Then we set up a killing field." "A what?" asked Drakmesh. "A series of prepared defensive positions designed to channel the enemy into engagement zones where we can maximize our advantages and minimize theirs. We turn space itself into a weapon." She gestured again, and the holographic display showed a complex three-dimensional map of the outer spiral arm. "Here, and here," she said, pointing to specific stellar formations. "We establish fortress systems with overlapping fields of fire. We mine the hyperspace lanes with gravity wells and sensor scramblers. We prepare fallback positions and create supply caches for extended operations." "You're talking about turning entire star systems into battlefields," Yithmir said, her voice hollow. "I'm talking about survival," Chen replied. "The Devourers think they're apex predators. Let's teach them what happens when predators meet something that evolved to hunt predators." Zexthara made his decision. He had seen enough of human history to know that when they committed to something, they followed through regardless of the cost. Right now, that frightening determination might be exactly what the galaxy needed. "I call for an emergency vote," he announced. "All in favor of granting humanity emergency membership status and approving the formation of a joint defense council." One by one, the votes came in, some reluctantly, others with obvious fear, but all with the recognition that they had no other choice. Humanity was about to show the galaxy what it meant to be a warrior species, and Zexthara was beginning to understand why the stars themselves might tremble at what was coming. As the vote concluded and emergency powers were granted, Admiral Chen saluted the council with crisp military precision. "Thank you for your trust," she said. "Now let's go to war." The phrase sent shivers through every being in the chamber. For most species, war was an abstract concept, something that happened to other people in distant places. For humans, Zexthara was starting to realize war was just another day at the office. And as the first reports came in of Devourer scouts probing the outer defenses, he wondered if the galaxy was about to discover that sometimes the monsters hiding in the dark weren't the most dangerous things in the universe. Sometimes the most dangerous things were the ones that rushed toward the monsters weapons in hand, with nothing but grim determination and a plan that just might work. The meeting dissolved into rapid planning sessions and emergency communications. But Zextara remained in his observation post, watching the human fleet maneuver into defensive positions with practiced efficiency. For the first time in his long diplomatic career, he found himself hoping that the galaxy's newest members were every bit as dangerous as they appeared to be. The transformation of Fortress Kepler began exactly 72 hours after the emergency council session. Zextara stood on the observation platform of the constructor vessel Geometric Harmony, watching human engineering teams coordinate with alien specialists to turn the barren system into something that had never existed before in galactic history, a purpose-built killing ground. They work differently than we do. Observe Constructor Prime Unit 7742, its mechanical voice carrying a note of what might have been admiration. Our calculations show optimal efficiency through geometric precision and resource conservation. Their calculations prioritize redundancy and adaptability. Zextara watched as human workers in powered armor welded massive metal structures to asteroids, while Velnari crystal singers grew harmonic resonance chambers that would amplify sensor networks across the entire system. The humans had somehow convinced the normally reclusive Velnari that their peaceful crystalline technology was essential for warfare. "How do they do it?" he asked the constructor. The Velnari have refused military applications for their harmonic technology for 3,000 years. Admiral Chun demonstrated that their resonance chambers could be used to create early warning networks that would save civilian lives, 7742 replied. She reframed warfare as protection rather than aggression. Most efficient psychological manipulation we have observed. Through his enhanced visual sensors, Zextara could see the scope of the construction. Artificial asteroid belts were being arranged in precise formations that looked random, but actually created overlapping fields of fire. Gravity mines floated in seemingly empty space, ready to drag enemy ships out of hyperspace at predetermined coordinates. Supply stations disguised as debris fields dotted the outer system, each one capable of rearming and refueling the entire human fleet. But it was the humans themselves that fascinated and terrified him most. They moved with purpose unlike anything he had witnessed in other species. There was no hesitation, no debate over whether this course of action was wise or ethical. They had identified a threat, developed a plan to counter it, and now they executed that plan with mechanical precision. Constructor Prime, what is your analysis of human efficiency ratings? Curious. When working alone, humans achieve approximately 73% of constructor baseline efficiency. When working in groups, efficiency increases geometrically. Current observation shows human teams achieving 127% of baseline, with peak performance recorded at 203% during critical phases. How is that possible? Unknown. Hypothesis: human consciousness operates on both individual and collective levels simultaneously. They retain personal initiative while contributing to group awareness. No other organic species demonstrates this capability. A communication signal interrupted their observation. Admiral Chen's image appeared on the viewing screen, her uniform now showing signs of actual manual labor. Somehow, she had found time to personally inspect the construction work while coordinating a dozen different alien species and managing logistics across 17 star systems. Ambassador Zextara, I need to speak with you about the evacuation protocols. Of course, Admiral. Are there problems with the civilian relocations? No, the evacuations are proceeding ahead of schedule. The problem is that some of your people don't want to leave. Zextara felt his breathing sacs constrict. I don't understand. Chen's expression grew grim. We've got Florian research stations that refuse to abandon their long-term atmospheric studies. Velnari settlements that claim their crystal gardens can't be moved. Even some constructor facilities that are apparently too integrated with local infrastructure to relocate. But they understand the danger. They understand it intellectually, but they don't feel it the way humans do. Ambassador, your species have built a peaceful civilization where the greatest threats are equipment failures and resource allocation disputes. You've never had to run for your lives. Zextara pondered this. She was correct, of course. The most violent event in his species' recent history was a heated debate over mining rights in the Tau Ceti system, and that had been resolved through arbitration. What do you suggest? I'm going to show them something. But I need your permission first, because it's going to be disturbing. Before he could ask what she meant, the main viewing screen switched to long-range sensor feeds. The images were grainy and distant, but clear enough to make out massive geometric shapes moving through space. These are the latest reconnaissance reports from the outer edge, Chun said. The Devourers have just finished with the Zirian system. The image shifted, showing what had once been a thriving solar system with 6 inhabited worlds and countless orbital habitats. Now there was nothing but empty space and a slowly expanding cloud of cosmic dust. Ow! Whispered Constructor Prime 7742. The energy requirements to disassemble an entire system would be astronomical. Watch, Chun said. The display zoomed in on one of the Devourer's ships. It was easily 50 kilometers long, shaped like a blade that seemed to cut through space itself. As they watched, the ship deployed countless smaller vessels that swarmed around a remaining asteroid belt like hungry insects. They don't destroy, Chun explained. They consume. Everything gets broken down to basic atomic components and absorbed into their ships. Energy, matter, even the electromagnetic signatures of destroyed civilizations. They leave nothing behind because they take everything. Zextara stared at the feed in horror. The methodical way the swarm consumed everything in its path was more terrifying than any explosion or weapon discharge. It was the complete negation of existence. How many ships? He asked. Our best count puts it at approximately 15,000 vessels of various sizes. The largest ones appear to be mobile construction facilities that can build new ships from consumed matter. 15,000. The number was so large, it was almost meaningless. The combined fleets of all council species numbered fewer than 2,000 ships. Now do you understand why some of your people need to see this? Chun asked. They need to comprehend that this isn't a normal conflict where surrender is an option. The Devourers don't take prisoners or negotiate truces. They simply consume everything they encounter. Zextara authorized the transmission to all reluctant evacuation sites. Within hours, the holdout populations had changed their minds and were requesting emergency transport. But the reconnaissance data had also revealed something else. The Devourers were moving faster than expected. They'll be here in 8 days, not 18 months, Chun announced during an emergency briefing aboard the human flagship Indomitable. Something accelerated their timeline. The briefing room contained representatives from every major species, cramped together in a space designed for human proportions. The environmental systems were working overtime to maintain breathable atmosphere for everyone present. How is that possible? Demanded Counselor Drakmesh, his insectoid features clicking in agitation. Best guess? They detected our preparations. The energy signatures from the fortress construction probably alerted them to organized resistance. Chun displayed tactical projections on the holographic viewer. They're not just consuming randomly anymore. They're heading directly toward high-density population centers. They're intelligent, realized Counselor Yithmir. We assumed they were just some kind of space locusts, but they're adapting to our responses. Which changes everything, Chun agreed. We're not just fighting a force of nature. We're fighting someone who can think, plan, and counter our strategies. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Constructor Prime 7742 was the first to speak. Query: what adjustments to defensive preparations are required? Chun smiled, and once again Zextara felt that chill of recognition. When humans smiled like that, someone was about to have a very bad day. None, she said. In fact, this is good news. Good news. Yithmir's serpentine form had coiled into a defensive posture. How is an intelligent enemy good news? Because intelligent enemies make mistakes. They have egos, blind spots, and assumptions. Natural disasters are impartial, but thinking opponents can be fooled, misdirected, and beaten. She gestured to the tactical display. Look at their approach vector. They're coming straight at us, probably expecting either quick surrender or chaotic resistance. They don't know about human military doctrine. What is human military doctrine? Asked Zextara. Hit them where they ain't, Chun replied. Sun Tzu wrote about it 2,500 years ago. All warfare is based on deception. The enemy thinks they know what they're facing, so we show them something else entirely. The display shifted to show the Kepler system and surrounding space. Red markers indicated known devourer positions, while blue markers showed allied forces. They expect us to defend our fortress. Instead, we're going to let them take it. The room erupted in protest from every species representative. You want to surrender the system? Drakmesh's clicking had reached a frantic pace. We want them to think we're surrendering it, Chen corrected. The fortress is a trap, not a stronghold. When they move in to consume it, they'll find out why humans became the dominant species on a death world. She zoomed in on specific sections of the fortress construction. Those aren't defensive positions. They're camouflaged weapons platforms. The asteroid belt isn't cover for our ships. It's the delivery system for the largest minefield in galactic history. Zextara began to understand. You're going to let them get close enough to touch. Closer than that. We're going to let them start consuming the outer defenses. And when they're fully committed to the attack, when their ships are spread out and focused on resource extraction rather than combat, we're going to teach them what happens when humans get angry. Constructor Prime 7742's mechanical voice carried a note of what might have been awe. The entire system is a weapon. The entire system is bait, Chun corrected. The weapon is what we do once they take it. Over the next 6 days, Zextara watched humanity prepare for war in ways that defied his understanding of civilized behavior. Human soldiers practiced boarding actions against mock-ups of Devourer ships, training to fight in zero gravity with weapons designed to work in vacuum. Human engineers jury-rigged alien technologies into hybrid systems that shouldn't have been possible, combining Velnari harmonic disruptors with constructor precision targeting and Florian bioadaptive power sources. But most disturbing of all was their attitude. They weren't grim or desperate. They weren't even particularly serious. They joked, told stories, and seemed to be enjoying themselves. Zextara witnessed human crew members betting on kill counts, arguing over who would get the first confirmed destroyer, and decorating their weapons with what they called nose art. Don't they understand they might die? He asked Admiral Chun during one of their daily briefings. Of course they do. That's why they're having fun. I don't understand. Chun paused a review of tactical reports and looked at him directly. Ambassador, my great-grandfather fought in something called World War II. 70 million people died in that conflict. Do you know what he told me about it? Zextara shook his head. He said the worst part wasn't the fear or the violence or even watching friends die. The worst part was the boredom. Hours and hours of waiting, planning, and preparing, punctuated by brief moments of absolute terror. She gestured toward the viewing port, where human fighters were running practice drills and formations that looked like lethal ballet. So humans learned to find joy in the preparation. We tell jokes to manage fear. We compete with each other to stay sharp. We celebrate small victories to maintain morale. It's not that we don't take death seriously. It's that we refuse to let the possibility of death prevent us from living. And if you lose? Chin's smile returned, but this time it held something that made Zextara step back instinctively. Ambassador, humans don't lose wars. We sometimes agree to stop fighting, usually because we've broken the other side so completely that continuing would be unsporting. But lose? No. We might die, but we don't lose. The final day before the Devourer arrival, Zextara received permission to tour the human flagship. What he saw there changed his understanding of warfare forever. The ship's corridors hummed with activity, but it was organized chaos rather than panic. Damage control teams rehearsed emergency procedures while singing ancient human songs. Weapons crews competed to see who could load and aim fastest while maintaining perfect precision. Even the ship's cooks had armed themselves and cross-trained as emergency gunners. In the ship's chapel, which apparently humans considered necessary even on warships, crew members from dozens of different human cultures and belief systems prayed together, held memorial services for colleagues who might not survive, and made peace with their gods and themselves. Every single person on this ship volunteered for this mission, Admiral Chen told him as they watched the preparations. We have volunteers for every position, backup volunteers for the backup positions, and people still begging to be included. Why? Because this is what we do. When everything looks hopeless and the odds are impossible, humans step forward and say, let me try. It's not about being brave or fearless. It's about being too stubborn to give up. The Bridge of the Indomitable was a marvel of controlled chaos. Multiple species worked side by side, their various technologies integrated into a command system that somehow managed to function despite being a jury-rigged collection of incompatible systems. Admiral, called the tactical officer, long-range sensors are picking up the Devourer advance fleet. How many ships? Initial count shows 3,000 vessels, but more are still emerging from hyperspace. Chen nodded calmly. Right on schedule. Signal all Allied vessels to implement Phase 1 of the withdrawal. Zextera watched in fascination as the human fleet began what appeared to be a panicked retreat. Ships scattered in seemingly random directions, abandoning defensive positions and fleeing toward the inner system. To external observers, it would look like the Allies had lost their nerve at the sight of the overwhelming enemy force. But the movement wasn't random. It was choreographed. Ambassador, Chen said quietly, you're about to see something that no civilization in galactic history has ever witnessed. What's that? Humanity united in purpose. Every human ship out there, every crew member, every officer and enlisted person is part of a plan they helped create. Not because they were ordered to, but because they chose to. We're not just fighting for survival. We're fighting for the right to exist on our own terms. The Devourer fleet had fully emerged now, a massive swarm that blotted out the stars. They moved toward the apparently abandoned fortress with the confidence of predators who had never encountered serious resistance. They're taking the bait, reported the tactical officer. Good. Signal Phase 2. Hidden throughout the system, human ships that had appeared to flee instead moved into predetermined positions. The asteroid belt that looked like random debris revealed itself as a carefully constructed maze of weapons platforms and ambush points. The abandoned fortress began to power up systems that had been disguised as construction equipment. Admiral, Zextera said quietly, what happens if this doesn't work? Chen looked at him with those intense blue eyes, and for a moment he saw past the military bearing to something deeper. Fear, yes, but also an unshakable determination that seemed to burn like a star. Then, we improvise, she said. And if that doesn't work, we improvise some more. And if everything fails, and we're all going to die anyway, we make sure we take as many of them with us as possible. She turned back to the tactical display. But, Ambassador, I don't think that's going to be necessary. Because the Devourers are about to learn something important about humans. What's that? We may be individually weak, temporarily afraid, and occasionally stupid. But when we work together, when we commit to a cause, when we decide that something is worth fighting for. She paused as the first Devourer ships entered the kill zone. We're the most dangerous thing in the galaxy. The battle was about to begin, and Zextera finally understood why Admiral Chun had been smiling. The first shot of the war was not a weapon. Zextera watched from the bridge of the Indomitable as a single human fighter craft, no larger than a shuttle, accelerated directly toward the lead Devourer vessel. The massive enemy ship, 50 kilometers of alien metal and hunger, barely registered the approaching speck on its sensors. What is that pilot doing? Demanded Constructor Prime 7742, its mechanical voice tight with confusion. That vessel cannot possibly damage a Devourer capital ship. Admiral Chen's fingers flew over her tactical display, highlighting the fighter's trajectory. Lieutenant Martinez isn't trying to damage them. She's sending a message. The fighter craft streaked through the void, weaving between debris fields and past the grasping tendrils of smaller Devourer vessels. As it approached the massive command ship, its pilot began broadcasting on all frequencies. This is Lieutenant Sofia Martinez of the Terran Federation to the approaching hostile fleet. You have entered sovereign space belonging to the Galactic Council. You will withdraw immediately or face the consequences. Zextera stared at the display in disbelief. A single human in a fighter craft was attempting to negotiate with an armada that had consumed entire star systems. She knows they won't respond, Chen said quietly. This isn't about diplomacy. The Devourer fleet's response was immediate and predictable. Energy beams erupted from multiple vessels, converging on the tiny fighter. Lieutenant Martinez twisted her craft through an impossible series of maneuvers, dodging between energy blasts that could have vaporized a small moon. How is she avoiding those shots? Whispered Counselor Yithmir, who was observing from a protected alcove on the bridge. Human reflexes are faster than most species, Chen explained. And Martinez trained on the asteroid racing circuits near Jupiter. This is actually slower than she's used to. The fighter craft danced through the energy barrage for almost 3 minutes before finally succumbing to a direct hit. The explosion was small, barely visible against the vast scale of the enemy fleet. But something had changed. The Devourer advance had slowed, their formation tightening as they tried to understand what they had just witnessed. They expected instant surrender or panic, Chen observed. Instead, they got defiance. They're not sure what to make of it. One fighter against thousands of ships, said Zexthara. She accomplished nothing. She accomplished everything. Chen's voice carried a note of pride that seemed to fill the bridge. She showed them that humans don't surrender. More importantly, she showed every human in this fleet that we're not going to surrender. Martinez just gave us all permission to be heroes. The tactical display updated as the Devourer fleet resumed its advance toward the fortress. But now their movement was more cautious, probe ships scanning ahead for hidden threats. They're adapting, noted Constructor Prime 7742. Good, Chen replied. Adaptation means they're thinking instead of just reacting. And thinking opponents make more interesting mistakes. The fortress loomed ahead of the Devourer fleet, apparently abandoned and defenseless. Ancient asteroid mining platforms drifted in orbit, their fusion reactors cold, and their workers long evacuated. Orbital habitats showed no life signs, their lights dark, and their docking bays empty. The Devourers deployed their harvesting swarms, thousands of smaller vessels that began methodically disassembling the outer structures. They worked with mechanical efficiency, breaking down metal and composite materials into component atoms before transferring them to the massive command ships. Phase 3 initiation in 60 seconds, announced the tactical officer. Zexthara watched the countdown timer with growing tension. The human plan required precise timing and perfect coordination between ships scattered across the entire system. One mistake, one communication failure, and the trap would become a massacre. 30 seconds. The Devourer swarms had now penetrated deep into the fortress structure, their attention focused entirely on resource extraction. Their guard was down, their formations spread thin across multiple objectives. 10 seconds. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Execute Phase 3. What happened next defied every assumption Zexthara had ever held about the nature of civilized warfare. The asteroid belt exploded, not from weapons fire, but from thousands of concealed human ships that had been hiding in carefully carved caverns throughout the debris field. They emerged like a metallic plague, their engines flaring to life as they accelerated toward the surprised Devourer forces. All units, this is Admiral Chun. Remember your training. Remember your purpose. Remember that everyone you've ever loved is depending on what we do here today. Make humanity proud. The first wave of human fighters hit the Devourer swarms like a controlled avalanche. Instead of attempting to match the enemy's firepower, they used speed and maneuverability to get close enough to deploy weapons that defy galactic convention. Are those boarding torpedoes? Asked Constructor Prime 7742, its mechanical voice registering what might have been shock. Modified mining charges with human crews inside. Chen confirmed. We can't destroy their ships from outside, so we're going to destroy them from inside. Zexthara watched in horrified fascination as human soldiers voluntarily sealed themselves into what were essentially manned missiles, then fired themselves directly at enemy vessels. The torpedoes punched through alien hulls and deposited their human cargo into the interior of Devourer ships. That's suicide, whispered Counselor Yithmir. That's warfare, Chen corrected. Human style. The results were immediate and devastating. Internal explosions began erupting throughout the Devourer fleet as human saboteurs destroyed critical systems from within. Ships that had seemed invulnerable suddenly found themselves crippled, their harvesting operations grinding to a halt as crew compartments vented atmosphere and power systems overloaded. But the Devourers were adapting. Their remaining vessels began implementing countermeasures, sealing hull breaches and purging internal compartments to eliminate the human infiltrators. They're learning, Chen observed with something that might have been approval. Good. Phase 4 should be even more educational for them. The second wave of human ships emerged from hiding places that shouldn't have been possible. They rose from beneath the surface of airless moons, detached from camouflage positions on the fortress structures, and decloaked from sensor shadows that human engineers had calculated with mathematical precision. These weren't fighters or bombers. They were purpose-built weapons platforms, each one carrying firepower that matched entire Devourer destroyer squadrons. But, more importantly, they carried weapons that had been designed specifically to counter Devourer technology. Harmonic disruptors online, reported the tactical officer. Velnari crystal arrays are showing optimal resonance. The space around the fortress suddenly filled with invisible energy patterns that made the Devourer ships shudder and vibrate. Their perfect hull geometries, designed for maximum efficiency, became liabilities as harmonic frequencies found resonant frequencies and began tearing the massive vessels apart at the molecular level. "How did you weaponize Velnari technology?" demanded Zextera. "They refused all military applications." "We didn't weaponize it," Chin replied with that terrifying smile. "We convinced them to help us use it for defensive purposes. Every harmonic pulse is precisely calibrated to disrupt Devourer hulls while leaving our ships unaffected." The battle had now shifted from ambush to direct confrontation, and Zextera was beginning to understand why humanity's reputation for violence had spread so quickly through the galaxy. Human ships didn't just fight, they brawled. Instead of maintaining safe distances and exchanging long-range fire, human vessels closed to point-blank range and engaged in what their pilots apparently called knife fights. They used the debris from destroyed Devourer ships as improvised weapons, ramming chunks of alien metal into enemy vessels at relativistic speeds. "Contact, bearing 27 Mark IV, called the sensor operator. Devourer command ship is changing course. They're heading directly for us." Chun studied the tactical display. The massive alien vessel was breaking away from the main battle, accelerating toward the Indomitable with obvious hostile intent. "They've identified this ship as the command center," she realized. "They think if they eliminate me, the human fleet will lose coordination." "Will it?" asked Zextera. "That's not how human military organization works," Chun replied. "We don't have single points of failure because we learned a long time ago that leaders get killed in wars. Every ship captain out there is capable of independent command. Every squad leader can take initiative. Every individual soldier is authorized to adapt tactics based on changing circumstances." The Devourer command ship was now close enough that its details were visible on the main screen. It was a nightmare of organic curves and mechanical precision, its hull studded with weapons that could crack planets and harvesting equipment that could strip the atmosphere from a world. "Admiral," said the tactical officer, "should we implement evasive maneuvers?" Chun shook her head. "Maintain course and speed. Signal all ships to begin Phase 5. Phase 5. Zextera didn't remember any Phase 5 in the battle plans. "Phase 5 is what humans do when the plan stops working," Chun explained. "We improvise." The Indomitable shuddered as the first energy beams from the Devourer command ship struck its shields. Warning lights flashed throughout the bridge as power levels fluctuated under the massive assault. "Shields at 60% and falling," reported the engineering station. "Return fire, all batteries," Chun ordered. The human flagship's weapons opened up, sending streams of coherent energy and guided projectiles toward the enemy vessel. The shots struck the Devourer ship's hull, but seemed to have no effect, absorbed by some kind of adaptive shielding system. "Their defenses are learning to counter our weapons," observed Constructor Prime 7742. "Then, we'll have to teach them something new," Chin said. She activated the ship's intercom system. "All hands, this is the Admiral. Prepare for ramming speed." The bridge fell silent except for the hum of overtaxed engines and the distant rumble of weapons fire. "Admiral," said Zextera carefully, "did you just order your ship to ram the enemy vessel?" "I order my ship to do whatever is necessary to stop them," Chin corrected. "If that means ramming, then we ram. If it means self-destructing, then we self-destruct. If it means boarding their ship and fighting them hand-to-hand in their own corridors, then that's what we do." She turned to face the alien representatives on her bridge. "This is what you need to understand about humanity. We don't surrender because we can't conceive of defeat. We don't retreat because we have nowhere to go. And we don't give up because giving up means everyone we've ever cared about dies screaming." The tactical display showed human ships throughout the system converging on Devourer vessels like metallic wolves attacking a herd. But these weren't coordinated fleet maneuvers. Each ship was making its own decision to close with the enemy, each crew choosing to risk everything on the chance of victory. "They're all doing it," whispered Ythmir. "Every human ship is engaging at close range. Because that's where humans fight best," Chin said. "Up close, where skill and determination matter more than raw firepower. Where individual courage can change the outcome of entire battles." The Indomitable's engines howled as the ship accelerated directly toward the massive Devourer command vessel. Energy beams lashed out continuously now, tearing through armor plating and venting atmosphere from multiple hull breaches. "Collision in 30 seconds, announced the navigation officer. "Admiral," said Zexthara, "if we ram that ship, we'll all die." Chen looked at him with those intense blue eyes, and for the first time he saw something that might have been peace. "Maybe," she said, "but they'll die too. And every human ship that sees us ram will know exactly what they need to do to win this war. Which is whatever it takes." The countdown reached 10 seconds, then 5, then 3. At the last possible moment, the Devourer command ship veered away, its captain apparently unwilling to accept mutual destruction as an acceptable outcome. Chen smiled. "And that's why we're going to win this war. They have something to lose. We don't." The battle raged on around them, but something fundamental had changed. The Devourers were no longer advancing with unstoppable confidence. They were fighting for their lives against an enemy that seemed to welcome death as long as it came with victory. "Admiral," called the communications officer, "I'm receiving surrender requests from 17 Devourer vessels." "Surrender?" Chen looked genuinely surprised. "They can surrender?" "Apparently so. They're requesting terms." Chen studied the tactical display, where human ships continued their relentless assault on the remaining enemy forces. "Tell them the terms are simple," she said. "Complete withdrawal from all galactic territories, return of all resources taken from consumed worlds, and a binding agreement never to return." "And if they refuse?" Chen's smile returned, more dangerous than any weapon in her arsenal. "Then we keep fighting until there's nothing left of them to refuse with." Zexthara realized that he was witnessing something unprecedented in galactic history. For the first time ever, the Devourers had met a species that fought harder than they consumed, that adapted faster than they could counter, and that simply refused to be defeated. Humanity had just announced itself to the galaxy in the most unmistakable way possible. They had gone to war with the unstoppable force, and won. And every species in the galaxy would hear about it. The surrender negotiations took place aboard the crippled Devourer command ship, and Zexthara would never forget the sight of Admiral Chun walking through corridors that still dripped with alien atmosphere regulators, her boots clicking against metal floors designed for beings twice her size. The Devourer commander was a thing of crystalline beauty and mechanical precision, its body a fusion of organic neural networks and quantum processing matrices. It stood 3 meters tall, its form shifting between solid and energy states as it processed the unprecedented reality of defeat. "I am Convergence Prime 7799, it announced, its voice carrying harmonic frequencies that hurt to hear. "I speak for the collective intelligence that guides the harvest." "Admiral Sarah Chun, Terran Federation," Chun replied simply. "I speak for the species that just kicked your ass." The translation matrix struggled with the colloquialism, eventually settling on something that conveyed general hostility combined with physical dominance. Convergence Prime's crystalline features flickered with what might have been confusion. "Your resistance was unexpected," it admitted. "We have consumed 43 stellar civilizations. None have displayed your behavioral patterns." "What behavioral patterns?" asked Chen. "Individuals sacrificing themselves for abstract concepts. Units operating independently while maintaining group cohesion. Continued aggression despite mathematical certainty of destruction." Constructor Prime 7742, who had insisted on attending the negotiations despite the dangerous environment, leaned forward with obvious interest. "Query: elaborate on mathematical certainty of destruction." "At combat initiation, probability calculations indicated 97.34% likelihood of complete human fleet annihilation within 2.7 standard time units," Convergence Prime replied. "Humans continued fighting despite access to identical probability data." Chen smiled. "That's because humans are really bad at math when we're angry." Clarification required. "We don't fight because we think we can win. We fight because fighting is what we do. Some battles are worth losing if you lose them the right way." Zexthara watched the alien commander process this concept. Its crystalline form shifted through several configurations as it apparently consulted with the larger collective intelligence. "The Harvest Directive cannot comprehend this logic pattern," it finally said. "Survival requires resource acquisition. Resource acquisition requires expansion. Expansion requires consumption of available resources. Opposition to this process is fundamentally irrational." "Maybe," Chen acknowledged, "but Effective irrationality beats ineffective rationality every time. She gestured to the damaged ship around them. You calculated that you needed 15,000 ships to overwhelm our defenses. You were right. But you didn't calculate that humans would rather die fighting than live as food. You didn't account for the fact that we'd rather break our own ships ramming yours than let you have them. And you definitely didn't plan for species who'd voluntarily give us their most advanced technology just to spite you. The crystal singers and mechanical constructs should have preserved their resources for individual survival, Convergence Prime observed. Their behavior was equally irrational. They learned from us, Chen said with obvious pride. Turns out, given the right motivation, every species in the galaxy is willing to fight for something bigger than themselves. The negotiations continued for 3 days, with representatives from every galactic council species participating. The terms that eventually emerged were unprecedented in galactic history. Complete devourer withdrawal from all inhabited sectors, restoration of consumed resources where possible, and establishment of buffer zones patrolled jointly by human and alien forces. But the most significant result wasn't written in any treaty. Ambassador Zexthra, said Counselor Drakmesh during a private meeting aboard the constructor vessel Geometric Harmony, we need to discuss humanity's role in galactic affairs going forward. Of course. What concerns do you have? Drakmesh's insectoid features were clicking rapidly, a sign of extreme agitation. They're terrifying. In the space of 1 week, they've convinced every major species to share military technology, reorganized our entire defensive doctrine, and defeated an enemy that consumed 43 civilizations. And they're not stopping. Zexthra accessed the latest reports from human space. In the days following the Devourer's surrender, human exploration fleets had launched toward 17 different sectors, apparently conducting what they called threat assessment surveys. Human military advisors were working with every major species to upgrade their defensive capabilities. Human engineers were proposing joint infrastructure projects that would have been unimaginable just weeks earlier. They're acting like they own the galaxy, complained Counselor Yithmir during a secure communication from the Velnari homeworld. Human ships are everywhere, asking questions, making suggestions, offering assistance that we never requested. They defeated the Devourers, Zexthra pointed out. Perhaps they've earned some influence. That's not the problem, Yithmir replied. The problem is that they're making us better at everything. She transmitted a data package showing the results of human-alien collaboration. Velnari crystal technology, enhanced by human engineering principles, was producing harmonic resonance patterns that exceeded all previous theoretical limits. Constructor manufacturing efficiency had improved by 340% after implementing human quality control methodologies. Even Florian bioadaptation research had advanced decades in the space of a few weeks. They're not trying to conquer us, Yithmir continued. They're trying to help us become as dangerous as they are. The realization struck Zexthra with sudden clarity. Human behavior after their victory made perfect sense once you understood their underlying psychology. They hadn't fought the Devourers to prove human superiority. They had fought to protect the galactic community they wanted to join. Now, they were working to ensure that community could protect itself. They're preparing us for the next threat, he said. What next threat? Asked Drakmesh. Zexthra accessed the human strategic reports that Admiral Chun had shared with the Council. The documents painted a picture of a galaxy that was far more dangerous than anyone had realized. The Devourers weren't unique. They were just the first major threat to reach the inhabited sectors. According to human deep space reconnaissance, there are at least 12 other expansionist powers in nearby galactic regions. The Devourers were actually one of the smaller ones. The silence that followed this revelation was broken only by the mechanical whirring of Constructor Prime 7742's processing systems. 12 others, whispered Drakmesh. Worse than that. Human xenobiologists believe that aggressive expansion is the normal state of most spacefaring civilizations. Peaceful cooperative societies like ours are apparently the exception, not the rule. How do they know this? Because that's how humans used to be, Zexthra replied. According to their historical records, Earth was dominated by dozens of competing human civilizations that fought constantly for resources and territory. They only learned to cooperate after nearly destroying their entire planet. He transmitted Admiral Chen's final report to the assembled counselors. They think we're evolutionarily naive. We developed spaceflight before we learned how to fight properly. So we created a galactic civilization that was defenseless against anything truly hostile. And now, they're teaching us how to survive. The changes were already visible throughout the galaxy. Human military academies were accepting students from every member species, teaching alien officers human tactics and strategic thinking. Human shipyards were building hybrid vessels that combined the best technologies from multiple civilizations. Human exploration teams were mapping potential threat corridors and establishing early warning networks in previously unmonitored regions. They're militarizing the entire galactic community. Observe Constructor Prime 7742. They're protecting it, Zextera corrected. There's a difference. What difference? Militarization is about conquest. Protection is about preservation. Humans aren't trying to control us. They're trying to teach us how to control our own destiny. 3 months after the Devourer War, Zextera stood once again on the observation deck of a Galactic Council station. But this time, he was watching something that would have been impossible before humanity joined the galactic community. A joint military exercise involving ships from 23 different species, all working together under human coordination to practice defending against simulated invasion. Velnari crystal singers are providing early warning networks. Constructor vessels offering mobile manufacturing support. Florian bio ships serving as field hospitals and supply depots. And humans everywhere, not commanding but teaching, not conquering but enabling. Admiral Chun, he said during a private communication to the Indomitable, I have a question. Go ahead, Ambassador. Why are you doing this? You could have leveraged your victory into political control over the entire galaxy. Instead, you're giving away your military advantages and teaching potential rivals how to fight. Chen's image on the screen showed her genuine confusion at the question. Ambassador, you're thinking like a politician. I'm thinking like a soldier. I don't understand the distinction. Politicians think about power. Soldiers think about mission success. My mission isn't to control the galaxy. It's to protect it. She gestured to something off-screen, probably a tactical display. There are things out there in the dark between galaxies that make the Devourers look like a minor nuisance. Species that have been fighting for millions of years. Entities that exist purely to consume or destroy. Forces that could end all life in this galaxy without even noticing we exist. How do you know this? Because we've been listening to their communications. Human deep space monitoring stations have been intercepting signals from civilizations that are so advanced and so hostile that they make our worst nightmares look like children's stories. Chen's expression grew serious. The only way any of us survive what's coming is if we're all strong enough to fight together. Not as separate species with competing interests, but as a unified galactic civilization that's ready for war on a scale that's never been imagined. You're preparing for a war that may never come. I'm preparing for a war that's definitely coming, Chen corrected. The only question is whether we'll be ready for it. Zextera considered this perspective. In the space of a few months, humanity had transformed the galaxy from a peaceful confederation of scholars and traders into a military alliance capable of defending itself against existential threats. What if you're wrong? What if these threats you're preparing for don't materialize? Chun smiled, but this time it wasn't the dangerous expression he had learned to fear. It was something warmer, more hopeful. Then we'll have created a galactic civilization that's strong enough to explore beyond this galaxy, smart enough to solve any problem, and unified enough to accomplish anything we can imagine. She paused. Either way, everyone wins. As their conversation ended, and Zextera returned to observing the joint military exercises, he realized that humanity had accomplished something unprecedented in galactic history. They had taken a collection of peaceful species and transformed them into something stronger without destroying what made them unique. The Velnari were still crystal singers, but now their songs could shatter enemy ships. The constructors still built perfect geometric structures, but now those structures were fortresses that could withstand any assault. The Florians still studied atmospheric adaptation, but now their research was developing life support systems that could sustain entire fleets during extended campaigns. Humanity had weaponized the galaxy's diversity, turning every species' unique abilities into tactical advantages for the greater good. And in doing so, they had created something that truly was capable of making the stars tremble. Not through conquest or domination, but through the simple recognition that sometimes the best way to preserve peace is to become very, very good at war. The exercise continued through the night cycles, and Zextera watched human instructors patiently teaching alien crews how to coordinate complex maneuvers, how to adapt tactics to unexpected situations, and, most importantly, how to never give up no matter how bad things looked. By the time it ended, he understood why Admiral Chun had been smiling during that first council meeting. She hadn't just been confident about humanity's ability to fight the Devourers. She had been confident about their ability to teach the galaxy how to fight anything that threatened it. And, watching 23 different species working together with deadly efficiency, Zextera realized that confidence had been completely justified. 2 years after the Devourer War, Zextera stood in the command center of Bastion Station, the massive defensive platform that had been constructed at the edge of galactic space. Around him, representatives from 47 species worked together to monitor early warning networks that stretched across 3 galaxy clusters. The station itself was a marvel of cooperative engineering. Velnari crystal matrices provided instantaneous communication across impossible distances. Constructor precision manufacturing had created defensive systems that could adapt to any threat. Florian bioadaptive technology maintained perfect environmental conditions for every species present. But it was the humans who had made it all possible. Incoming signal from Deep Space Monitor 7, announced technician Valandra, her crystalline form resonating with harmonic frequencies that translated directly into the station's communication systems. They're detecting massive energy signatures approaching from the void between. Admiral Chun materialized on the main holographic display, her image transmitted from the human exploration vessel Pathfinder, which was currently investigating anomalous readings in the galactic periphery. Ambassador Zextera, we've got a problem. A big one. The main viewing screen activated, showing long-range sensor data from the edge of explored space. What Zextera saw there made his breathing sacs constrict with familiar terror. Ships. Thousands of them, each one larger than anything in the combined galactic fleets. But these weren't Devourer vessels with their mechanical precision and harvesting equipment. These are something far worse. Meet the Burning Fleet, Chin said grimly. They call themselves the Eternal Crusade, and according to the communication intercepts we've managed to decode, they've been conquering galaxies for approximately 50,000 years. The ships were beautiful in a way that hurt to contemplate. Flowing organic curves that seemed to shift and change as they moved, hulls that appeared to be forged from crystallized starlight, weapons that looked like living things growing from the superstructure. How many? Asked Constructor Prime 9834, the latest representative from the Constructor civilization. Conservative estimate puts it at 40,000 capital ships, with support vessels numbering in the hundreds of thousands, Chin replied. They make the Devourer fleet look like a reconnaissance patrol. What do they want? Whispered Counselor Yithmir, her serpentine form coiled into a defensive posture. Same thing every conqueror wants. Everything. According to their broadcasts, they consider themselves the rightful heirs to all existence. Everyone else is just temporarily borrowing resources that belong to them. The transmission from the Pathfinder showed additional data as human scientists completed their analysis of intercepted communications. They're not like the Devourers, Chun continued. The Devourers consumed resources because it was their nature. These beings choose to conquer because they believe it's their destiny. They have a complex mythology about being chosen by the universe itself to impose order on chaos. How long before they arrive? Asked Zextera. 18 months, assuming they maintain current velocity. But they're not just heading for our galaxy. They're heading for 17 galaxies simultaneously. This isn't an invasion. It's a harvest on a scale that defies comprehension. The command center fell silent as the implications sank in. The Galactic Council had spent 2 years preparing for another threat like the Devourers. But this was beyond anything they had imagined. Admiral, said Counselor Drakmesh, his insectoid features clicking with nervous energy, what are you recommending? Chin's expression grew thoughtful. Honestly, I'm not sure there's anything we can recommend. This is beyond conventional military response. You're saying we should surrender? Valandra's crystalline form rang with disbelief. I'm saying we need to think differently about this problem, Chin replied. The Eternal Crusade has been doing this for 50,000 years. They've conquered hundreds of galaxies, absorbed countless civilizations, and perfected the art of large-scale warfare. They're not going to be stopped by anything we've learned from the Devourer War. Then what do we do? Chin smiled, and Zextara felt a familiar chill run through his body. When humans smiled like that, the universe was about to change in fundamental ways. We cheat. The holographic display shifted to show a star map of the local galactic group, with emphasis on regions that have been marked as unexplored or hazardous. For the past 18 months, while everyone else has been building defenses and upgrading fleets, human exploration teams have been mapping what lies beyond known space. And we found some very interesting neighbors. The display zoomed in on a region marked with warning symbols and hazard indicators. The architects, Chen announced, a machine intelligence that's been dormant for approximately 2 million years. They built the hyperspace lane network that connects all known galaxies, then, apparently, went to sleep. Machine intelligence? Constructor Prime 9834 leaned forward with obvious interest. Clarification. Are they similar to Constructor civilization? Not even close. The constructors build things. The architects build reality itself. They don't just manipulate matter and energy. They manipulate the fundamental forces that govern how the universe operates. Chun gestured, and the display showed massive geometric structures that dwarfed entire star systems. These are some of their smaller construction projects. That ring structure there? It's a gravity well generator that can create artificial black holes. Those crystalline formations? They're dimensional anchors that prevent hyperspace travel in designated regions. Why are they dormant? Asked Ythmir. Near as we can tell, they finished their construction projects and decided to wait for something interesting to happen. 50,000 years of the Eternal Crusade apparently wasn't interesting enough to wake them up. But Chen's smile widened. But they've never encountered humans before. The next phase of Chen's briefing revealed the true scope of what humanity had been planning while the rest of the galaxy focused on conventional preparations. Operation Prometheus, she announced, named after the human mythological figure who stole fire from the gods. You're planning to wake up the architects, realized Zextara. We're planning to introduce them to some very interesting neighbors, Chen corrected. The architects have been dormant because their universe has been peaceful and predictable. The Eternal Crusade represents change on a scale that might actually catch their attention. And then we see what happens when an irresistible force meets an immovable object. The details of Operation Prometheus were staggering in their scope and audacity. Human teams would infiltrate the architect's structures and attempt to reactivate their monitoring systems, essentially waking up beings that had technology so advanced it was indistinguishable from divine power. Admiral, said Constructor Prime 9834, the probability of successful activation without triggering hostile response is approximately 0.003%, which is why we're not going to activate anything, Chen replied. We're going to let the Eternal Crusade do it for us. The tactical display showed the projected path of the Crusade fleet through local space. At 3 different points, their route would take them directly through architect construction zones. The architects built automatic defense systems around their installations. Not weapons in any conventional sense, but reality manipulation devices that activate when their sleep cycles are disturbed. The Eternal Crusade is going to trigger those defenses whether they want to or not. You're using the invaders as an alarm clock, breathed Ythmir. We're creating a situation where 2 cosmic-level powers are forced to interact, Chen corrected. What happens after that is beyond our control, but at least it changes the game. And if the architect decide we're all threats to be eliminated, Chen shrugged. Then we die fighting gods instead of dying as slaves. I consider that an improvement. The operation launched 6 months before the estimated arrival of the Eternal Crusade. Human ships, accompanied by volunteer crews from every major species, departed for the 3 architect sites that lay along the invasion route. Zextara chose to accompany the mission to Architect Site Gamma, partly out of diplomatic duty and partly because he had become addicted to watching humans attempt the impossible. The site itself defied description. Geometric structures that existed in more than 3 dimensions stretched across an entire star system. Crystalline formations that seemed to exist in multiple realities simultaneously orbited a star that burned with mathematical precision rather than nuclear fusion. How do we even approach something like this? Asked Captain Morrison, the human officer commanding their small fleet. Very carefully, replied Dr. Sarah Okafor, the human xenoarchaeologist who had spent months studying architect technology. According to our analysis, the defensive systems are designed to respond to hostile intent. As long as we approach peacefully and don't try to interfere with their installations, we should be safe. Should be. Nothing about this is guaranteed, Captain. We're dealing with technology that's beyond our current understanding. The approach to the architect's site took 3 days, with their ships moving at minimal velocity to avoid triggering automated defenses. The structures around them grew larger and more incomprehensible as they approached, revealing details that human science couldn't begin to explain. "Are those living buildings?" asked Zexthera, staring at structures that seemed to breathe and pulse with organic rhythms. "Architecture that exists at the intersection of matter and consciousness," Dr. Okafor replied. "The architects didn't just build in space. They built in the conceptual framework that defines what space is." On the second day, they detected the first signs of architect attention, scanning beams that analyzed their ships with impossible precision, apparently determining not just their physical composition, but their intentions and capabilities. "Contact," announced the communications officer. "We're receiving a signal." The transmission was unlike anything Zexthera had experienced. Instead of words or images, it conveyed concepts directly into his consciousness. Purpose, origin, destination, intent. The architects wanted to know who they were and why they had come. "This is Captain Morrison of the Terran Federation." Morrison responded, speaking aloud, while somehow knowing that the beings listening would understand regardless of language. "We come seeking an audience with the architects." The response came immediately, flooding their minds with complex information streams that were almost too much to process. "They're curious about us, Dr. Okafor said, her voice strained from the mental contact. "We're the first organic intelligences to approach their installations in several million years." "Are they hostile?" "No. They're interested. They want to know about human civilization, about our technology, about our development patterns." Over the next several hours, a complex exchange developed between the human expedition and the architect intelligence. It wasn't exactly conversation, but rather a sharing of conceptual information that left all participants mentally exhausted. "They're waking up," Dr. Okafor finally announced. "Not fully, but more active than they've been in eons. They're beginning to pay attention to current galactic events, including the Eternal Crusade, especially the Eternal Crusade. They're displeased by the concept of conquest without purpose." "What does that mean?" "The architects build things that last forever. The crusade destroys things that took millions of years to develop. From their perspective, it's like watching vandals destroy priceless art." 3 days later, the Eternal Crusade fleet reached the edge of architect space. The battle that followed was less a conflict than a demonstration. The Crusade ships, confident from 50,000 years,